Excuse me. Well-timed hack at the beginning of a Monday edition of the Daily Ticket. And a good afternoon, everybody. What a weekend. What a last 12 hours, if that. We're not even at noon right now. Good grief. All right. We are actually, sorry, 12:05. Sean Barnard with you here today. And of course, Sean Barnard front and center, because all eyes in the basketball world are on the Philadelphia 76ers. Sean Barnard, wow.
Yeah.
What is happening, my friend?
Yeah, great afternoon, Sean Brace. That the thing happened. The thing that felt so impossible, that felt like it was never going to happen, is Paul George is a member of the Philadelphia 76ers. That for all the Daryl Morey critique that has floated around, he got his guy. He played his cards right. He put the Sixers in a spot to be able to capitalize on the best free agent in the market. That's what ended up happening. So while there are some critiques for Paul George as a player, he's by far the best option for this Sixers team, and still leaves him a little wiggle room to do some other things, which we're already seeing come into play.
That's crazy. Which it opened my eyes with the Knicks and everything that they had. I still was like, how do they have all this money? And then the Sixers still have opportunities to be made or money to make some other opportunities for this team. We'll talk about all of that. We got a lot to get to. Of course, Tyrese Maxey gets a new deal, a much-deserved new deal this morning, which was all part of this plan here. Notice I didn't say the word process because I think the process is officially over with the addition of Paul George. I kid. No, let's discuss it. Paul George ends up in a Sixers uniform, and yes, at this point in time, 34 years old, Sean Barnard, that's, the naysayers, they can find plenty to grasp onto. For me, it's about where Joel Embiid is at this point in time of his career. It's what he's been through with this organization. It's what we've been through as a fan base. And every single year, something changes in the NBA. So don't talk to me about years 2, 3, and 4 about this Paul George deal. I don't care. What I do care about is right here, right now. And you nailed it, Sean. This is the best opportunity, the best option for the Sixers to get out there and put the best team around Joel Embiid. Now, will I sit here and tell you that this team is better than the Boston Celtics? No. Will I sit here and tell you that they're going to own the New York Knicks? I don't know. I have no idea what the Knicks are going to look like. I have no idea what the Sixers are going to look like. I don't know if they're going to be healthy. But on paper, right here, right now, you got guys like Tim Bontemps, who covers the NBA on ESPN this morning, saying it's the best 3, bar none, in the league. It's hard to argue. It really is. But again, that is paper. The heartbroken Sixers fan here is very cautiously optimistic. And I am not trying to pour water on anybody's enthusiasm. To each their own. Hashtag one man's take. I'm just like, all right, show me what we got come October. Show me what we got November. But Sean, the calendar reached July 1st. So that can wait. But please, your thoughts on everything that just took place this morning.
Yeah, so Paul George, it's interesting his perception as a basketball player. It's kind of been all over the place throughout his career. If you're not a Paul George guy, you can find evidence why that is not the case, the injuries, the health concerns, and certainly some comments that I think the reality is this guy has not been cut out to be a 1 or a 2. But you know what? He doesn't have to be here in Philadelphia. And as far as the big 3 conversation, I think the Sixers absolutely have the best big 3 in the NBA. The only kind of competition I see is out there in Phoenix when talking about Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal. But the Sixers just fit together significantly better than those. So when you think about how this team is designed, it's Tyrese Maxey as a guard, it's Paul George as a wing, and it's Joel Embiid as a big man. Comparing that to a team like Phoenix, there's a lot of overlap in the stylistic way that they play, positionally, how ball dominant each of those guys are. And I think Paul George is going to be much better in more of an off-ball setting, which you will be asked to do much more often here. And I think one of the major talking points throughout this offseason, there's been this kind of swing back in the NBA, and we know it's a copycat league for how teams are designed, but there's been like this swing back for building through role players and having a true team. And I think that is certainly warranted. You have to nail it on both ends. You have to have guys that can be rotational players that can make an impact, win a game, as we've seen with players like Nico here in Philadelphia here. But one of the interesting points that really diving into the historical context here, and shout out to Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports who wrote this here, but since 2012 and 2013, the chance a team reaches the conference finals nearly doubles from 18.5% to 30.8%, when a roster boasts 3 top players compared to 2 top players, according to the Team Building Reviewed, with top players being defined as those who made an All-Star or All-NBA team within 2 years of the current season and played 29 minutes per game. The championship odds for those teams with 2 top players stand at just 0.9% compared to 14% featuring teams with 3. Every title winner since 2013 has rostered at least a trio of alphas aside from 2 teams. Last June's Denver Nuggets, with Nikola Jokic being the sole All-Star, although my asterisk there is Jamal Murray's an All-Star talent. He's just never officially had it because of injuries and all that type of thing. And Aaron Gordon has been an All-Star as well. And the Lakers with that bubble year being the only other exception there. And as far as Daryl Morey, he's absolutely wired to swing for the fences and bring in those All-Stars. Paul George, for all the critiques you can throw, he's ascended to a level of stardom that leap from like a really good player to true all-star player is the most difficult one to take as as a basketball player. Like we saw it with Tobias Harris, that the hopes with that contract he could grow a little bit, and that didn't happen. And even if you want to compare it to a guy like Brandon Ingram, you can sell me on Ingram's younger, he's more athletic, maybe he can grow. But the reality is there's no guarantee, and I think it's probably more likely than not that he can't take that next step into like a true, legit all-star caliber player. That's who Paul George is and has been for quite some time. So this is a slam dunk to me. And again, the flexibility that they kept all their draft picks. They still have a couple dances they can do around the salary cap here. So I don't think the offseason is over by any means.
No, I totally agree. It's a slam dunk across the board. Daryl Morey deserves a ton of credit for being steady in the boat and dealing with what has come down his way from the start when he took over and to where he went last year with James Harden and holding on, didn't lose any of the picks, still able to go out there and build around Joel Embiid, keep Tyrese Maxey. Of course, there's details in that contract that we can go over as well that were thumbs up for Morey and the Sixers in the future. On top of Kelly Oubre back, big damn deal.
Yeah.
Eric Gordon, decent player, been in the game forever, but of course you got to fill out a roster. And the big man, Andre Drummond. We discussed him. Drummond, like, you know, keeping it simple. Like everyone can take their conversation to where they want to go. This is about winning a championship, and it's never happened for Daryl Morey. Daryl Morey has his ways of going about it. He absolutely sees things in the star lens, which I as much as I look at what the Knicks are doing right now, going, man, I would love to be the New York Knicks. That just doesn't happen overnight. It just doesn't. And the Knicks were lucky, and good luck to them. I still like the Sixers over the Knicks, but that's plenty of time to discuss that. I do like what the Knicks are doing, and this is about a team that hasn't had the success. I'm kind of using that word in a little lightly there, that the Sixers had. This was a joke of an organization. So everything they're doing right now, it's huge for the New York Knicks. And the Sixers' big issue is getting over that hump. Can they get to an Eastern Conference final? Can they get to a championship? Of course, with Paul George, that raises the stakes. Oh, by the way, Paul George has been to the conference finals 3 times, including in 2021 when he took the Clippers there without James Harden, 2 times with the Pacers, back-to-back seasons, if I'm not mistaken. So he's a guy that's gotten to the ECF, has not gotten, or conference finals, has not gotten to the NBA finals. Look, it all comes down to health. We all know how this works. This isn't anything new here. Bring in a guy like Paul George. He has his deficiencies, but he played well last year. He played in 76 games. You know, just from the stance of where we're at, what else he could have done. You brought up Brandon Ingram. I'm glad we're not in that discussion anymore. I would much rather Paul George, and I hope everybody would become in agreement on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I want to view this like full pessimistic lens right here, like say Paul George is looking washed, the injuries are wearing on him, his body's deteriorating. At the worst, last season he shot 41.3% from 3 on 7.9 3-point attempts per game. That's a ridiculous combination of volume.
That was better than Clay. That was better than Clay.
Absolutely. So like, say that's the case and he turns into a crazy expensive spot up shooter. That's not ideal, obviously. And I do genuinely think he'll be much more than that, but that's a pretty good worst case scenario to have. And in reality, like this Sixers team, what they've been missing, sure, there's a lot to point to. The rebounding issues against the Knicks were put on full display. There's other stuff to break down there, but the reality is they have not had enough offensive options. And that's what Paul George is going to do, that he is going to be a guy who can get his, you can run offense through him. He's a primary creator in an offense in the right context and situation. So this is a slam dunk in my mind.
First thing that comes to my mind thinking about that Knicks series, and yes, Joel Embiid, even on 1 foot, still was dominant.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Joel Embiid. I get it. It's a culmination of everything for Sixers fans. I'm right there with you. Trust me. I'm very reluctant to get on this microphone going, yeah, anything Sixers, but you got to give it up. You have to give it up. They put themselves in a nice position. Back to the Knicks series, the issues were when Joel Embiid came off the damn floor, we were atrocious.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So now, look, I just as far as with the way everything has been put together in this last 2 seasons, with what we saw, Maxey, the growth, people questioning that he had that ability, that leap that he took last year. I still think there's plenty more in the tank for him to rise to another level. And that's what really excites me more than anything, because I want to see what Tyrese Maxey can do. Is it possible with the best big man, perhaps the game has seen in quite some time with Joel Embiid, that he's not the number one? Can we see? I think that's a big ask. Don't get me wrong. But you never know. This might work out like that throughout the course of a stretch of the season where Tyrese Maxey is the guy, where Tyrese Maxey is leading the charge. And like I said, it's a long damn journey. It's get to the playoffs, and then we'll tackle that when we get there. This team has been awesome throughout the course of the regular season. I fully expect them to be dominant again this year. And there was a pretty cool stat. This was cool. You want to talk about teams that never compete at the same damn time. The Celtics, Knicks, and I believe the Sixers. This is the first time. There's one season in NBA history, Celtics, 76ers, and Knicks won at least 50 games. That was in 1981. So from the standpoint of the league, this is pretty damn cool. Nobody cares about that. We want to win an NBA championship. That's what it comes down to. But, man, there's a lot to like across the board from all three of these organizations right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Tyrese Maxey. For starters, I do think people are underselling just how good this kid has gotten right now, like without even taking another leap. And I'm with you that I think there's more leaps for him to take. That I do think the context of the Sixers team is still Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey's team, and Paul George is this third star. That I think that's how it shapes out, not the other way around, that Paul George becomes the number 2. Maxey's ready, and deservingly so. And the other part that I don't want to get overshadowed in this whole conversation, deserves a ton of credit for having like the trust in the Sixers organization here for Tyrese Maxey. That it's very rare. We flash back to last offseason where Tyrese Maxey becomes extension eligible. If he signs that extension at that point in time, there is no room to sign Paul George. There is no max contract slot. Tyrese Maxey showed the faith in Daryl Morey and the organization, said we can put it off until this summer. And again, this worked out perfect that Maxey had a career year, was a first-time All-Star, all these type of things. But there's very much a world where that doesn't happen. Say he does unfortunately get injured, or there's something that goes down. We're having some tough conversations right now. He showed that trust. The Sixers rewarded him, and now he has Paul George to play with because of it. So if Tyrese Maxey was not willing to take that risk on himself, we don't have Paul George or not having these conversations. So a little hat tip to Tyrese, and hopefully it is all worth it for everybody.
Happy birthday, Mike Muscala, too. Just want to put that out there as well. No, look, there's a lot to like, and I know we're the kings of the offseason at times, but that's just the way this league is. And when you want to put together a roster that you think that can go out there and beat a team that set the bar extremely high with Boston, they were the best team all season long. I fully expect Boston to get fat. I do. It happens to all champions, and everybody raises their level when you have the bullseye in the back. And that's what Boston's going to get every single night, no matter who they go up against. I'm not going to say teams took nights off or anything along those lines, but it's just a different feel when the champion comes into your building. So that with Denver, everybody had pegged Denver winning the championship again this year, hell, getting at least to the finals, and they didn't do that. They didn't get to the Western Conference Finals. So anything is possible. We'll see what happens. Boston has a really good team. So did the Sixers. And I wasn't saying that about the Philadelphia 76ers last week because I was questioning who the hell was even on this roster besides Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. And now we got our answers. It's a pretty good team. Who else are we missing here, Sean? Who else did we discuss so far from this statement? Andre Drummond was important because of those stupid minutes that Joel Embiid has to come off. I'm not expecting Drummond to go out there and score 15 points a game, but could we at least limit the other team when Joel Embiid comes off the floor?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the biggest thing. And rebounding is the number one thing jumps out. Like that Knicks series specifically, it was put on full display. Andre Drummond ranked in the 100th percentile in both offensive and defensive rebounding rate last year. It doesn't get any better than that. It just doesn't. And like Drummond, I do think there's a bit of, fond memories in a way that maybe we maybe a little bit above what should be the case, that he is still a guy who will be frustrating at moments. He likes to pass, do some wild passes a little more than he should, but he is a guy who genuinely wants to be in Philadelphia, which is important. He liked seemingly being around the organization, playing behind Joel Embiid, which is not the easiest thing to do for a guy who, at a point in time, Andre Drummond was considered one of the premier centers in this league. So for him to kind of take a step back and be a guy that can be just comfortable as being a backup to this team, I think is important there. I think it's very clear that he wanted to be here, which I think is cool. But those rebounding numbers are notable. And even with a coach that was Doc Rivers at the time when he was here the first time, there were brief stints where we saw a little bit of Drummond and Embiid on the floor together for some big time rebounding moments. I think Nick Nurse could lean into that as well. So a good guy to have around. And I do think the talent is there. So shout out to Andre Drummond.
I know a lot of people have been putting this on the timeline. Do you look at it the same way? And I know it's easy to contract versus contract, money versus money, that out Tobias and Paul George. Is that how you're reading this as well? Because that's real easy and general, that you could say, okay, and of course you're going to get more from Paul George, whether it's defense, whether it's outside shooting. I know he will have his game. If you look at that last series that he played in, for the Clippers, he had a game where he scored like 8 points. There was a bad game out of the 6 games he played in that series. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's going to go out there and be like Luka at the age of 34, but he will be better than Tobias Harris, who got $52 million from the Detroit Pistons. Yep. Wow, dude, like we all knew he's going to be either Detroit or San Antonio. He ends up with the Pistons. God bless him. See ya. Do you read it as easy as that as well? Like, hey, out Tobias, now you're inserting Paul George there.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it exactly like that. And first off, shout out to Tobias, just an all-time bag chaser and a guy who fulfilling his basketball destiny of being able to score empty calorie statistics on a losing NBA team. That's just
he's gonna make it. He's gonna be in the Hall of Fame. Watch.
No, jeez. He better not be. But as far as
as far as bag chasers, he's already there.
That for sure. I think I could boil down like the per capita, like money per value provided for a team, got to be among the worst ever. But like the frustrating thing about Tobias Harris is he was not good enough to be a primary option on a winning team. That as a scorer, he was not just efficient enough in those kind of numbers. And he also was so bad at the complementary skills, the little things like getting a key rebounder, coming up with a loose ball, getting on the floor, or just defending. Like he's a really bad perimeter defender. His hips are just like so tight. And when he goes to side, he just got blown by a ton. When you think about Paul George in comparison to this, he is probably past the point of being like a primary go-to guy like that, but he's still a better off the dribble scorer and ISO scorer than Tobias Harris has ever been. And when you think about the complementary skill sets, like I'm a big believer in spacing is the name of the game, and teams built around Joel Embiid. Just looking at like the 3-point numbers, again, Paul George 41.3% on 7.9 3-point attempts last year. Tobias Harris 35.5% from beyond the 3-point arc on less than 4 attempts per game. That right there is like a huge difference. And again, it is all the other stuff. Like Paul George, even at this age, a better defender than Tobias Harris has ever been. Even at this age, he's a guy who can take guys off the dribble and dunk on guys in a way that Tobias has never been able to. So it goes back to that conversation of taking to that leap into like the true all-star players versus just good players. And Tobias has been one of the more frustrating players in that. So I do think you take Tobias off this team and add Paul George straight up, we are viewing it in a much different light. But I think the Sixers could even take more strides forward than that.
All right. Well, what else have we covered from the Sixers perspective? Again, rebounding and should be improved. 3-point shooting from outside, they're still not done. Again, we don't know, and you might find some of those outside shot makers come, a trade deadline or just a buyout. Anything is possible. You know how this works. When you're winning, they want to be a part of it. Those players see there's an opportunity to go and play in a place like Philadelphia where they're passionate, they're crazy. And oh, by the way, this team has the juice to possibly make a run. You're going to see some good players possibly come over here. So what else? Where are their weaknesses right now as far as if this roster is complete right here, right now? What is a weakness in your mind for the Sixers?
Yeah, I'll start with Nico Batum leaving is a bigger deal than I think people are giving credit. He's a guy whose impact was far beyond the box score last year. I'm very surprised in kind of the phrasing of how it's worded. Kelly Aiko, who's a pretty prominent, primarily a Rockets reporter, was the guy who came out with this initially. My guess is Batum's just straight up retiring. To me, it would be a huge miss if he's playing on another roster next year. And I think like basically the pitch to Batum has been like, if Paul George doesn't end up coming to Philly, that he would be in line to be one of these candidates who gets overpaid a little bit with the intention of trading that contract and trading that player. Ultimately, the cards did not align for that, and it seems like he's not a guy willing to take a veteran's minimum. I know the plan was for last year to be his last year in the NBA straight up, and then he's going to retire after international competition. He kind of pumped the brakes on those when he first got to Philly, that that decision is not fully made. But I do think if he's walking away, it's probably to retire, but it's a huge miss on the Sixers' part if he's suiting up for another team. Just a very good entry passer to Joel Embiid, a real adult in the room type of vibe of just making the right decision constantly. And he absolutely lit the Heat on fire during that playing game. That they likely don't win that game if it's not for that explosion from beyond the three-point arc from Batum. So I do think that's a weakness there. I would like to add a true point guard too. It does seem like the signs are still pointing towards Kyle Lowry coming back, which in a more minimized role than was the case last year, I can get behind Lowry being around. But I do think both all the guys that we're mentioning, the Tyrese Maxeys, the Jared McCains, the Paul George, none of these guys are set the table type offensive guys, that just true point guard. So I would like that to be added. I still would like a little more wing defense. Reggie Bullock's a name that's been floating out there who I would love. Dorian Finney-Smith's a player who seems to be on the trade market from the Nets perspective as they're blowing things up. So still work to do there. But I would say probably my biggest concern is it's going to be tough to quantify how to replace a guy like Nico Batum, who for stretches last year was the Sixers' third or fourth best player. So that's a little bit of a concern for me.
Yeah, and that was how we got the party started yesterday, where it was like, wait a minute, no, this isn't good. And then KCP, who was rumored also to be in talks with the Sixers, he signs with the Magic, I believe. And then everybody started painting, oh my goodness, this is the end. We're in trouble here. I'm curious, who else was in the running for Paul George? Was it the Pistons and Sixers and Magic, and that's it?
Magic certainly. For me, it was look, I thought he was staying in LA was the biggest thing, and it's clear
Same.
that they drew their line in the sand that we're not going above this price, and this year length is the larger conversation. They did not want to give that fourth year on top of the max contract, which the Sixers were clearly willing to do. It did feel like if he was leaving, it was either Orlando or Philly. Detroit also technically had the cap space, but I just don't think they're in the same outlook. The Utah Jazz were sneaky a contender as well, that there was a little bit of report of looking to pair him with Lauri Markkanen that Jake Fisher reported there. But ultimately, it felt like Sixers or LA was the decision from Paul George's mind. And he ended up making the right one and coming to Philly, which I'm very surprised to be the case, but very happy that it is.
Yeah, the Clippers, I can't speak to what exactly is happening out there. And I don't know if beauty is in the eye of the beholder on this one. I know that I would prefer Paul George or James Harden, maybe because we've been through that. I think there are pluses for James Harden, and I just don't see him getting over the hump and winning that championship. That's never how I read Paul Reed. Again, if that's unfair, I understand, but that's just one man's take. Hashtag there. But the Clippers made the decision, and I texted you last night, and you did lay that out. You said it came down to the 1 year, and
yeah,
that's an interesting spot to say, no, we can't do that with the new arena, Paul George in LA. How do you not keep them together? That was your plan all along, and you could not do so. So you have to go ahead and eat that as an L. I don't know how they're going to replace or what they plan on doing to replace. They're the Clippers at the end of the day. Well, Porter wasn't a Porter from Houston who has some baggage, to say the least, I think is out there. Yeah, look, Paul George is a 76er, man. It's a pretty good squad. Joel Embiid's happy.
Yeah,
That's going to quiet some things from the people out there that say Joel Embiid's going to be requesting a trade. Well, Daryl Morey went out there and brought a star. Is this, as far as in the history of Joel Embiid suiting up for the 76ers, as far as the starting five, we're not complete just yet, but man, it's some of the best he's ever had out there.
absolutely. And some that makes the most sense too, when you just look at how these guys can play off each other. Again, Paul George is the floor spacer. Even when Jimmy Butler is here, who he's another guy I think is a little bit more romanticized than probably should be the case for the half a season that he did spend in Philly. Jimmy went through a stretch where he just refused to shoot 3-pointers for a month and just would not do it. Paul George is going to be a guy who fits off Joel Embiid incredibly well. And when you add in Tyrese Maxey to this mix, you're seeing the bones of exactly how a proper NBA team should be constructed. So I absolutely think it makes the most sense of any Joel Embiid centric team that we have had. There's still going to be some other moves to fully fit things in here. I still would like a little more shooting as well. I think Oubre being back is an important Oubre, I think, makes even more sense in the context of this Sixers team than was the case last year. And particularly when you have Maxey and Paul George, who are more of, I guess, finesse type players that they want to get to their moves and that type of things. Oubre is a guy who wants to dunk it on everyone and tries every single game, which I think is important to have that kind of balance there. So very happy that Oubre is back as well. And that's another guy who proved plenty last year in his ability to do the dirty work and be a guy who will defend some top-notch players on the perimeter. We saw him do a great job on Jalen Brunson for stretches in that playoff. So happy that Oubre is back as well. And this is more positional versatility that we're talking about. I thought it was really interesting. The Woj tweet labeled Oubre as a two-guard, the starting two-guard for the Sixers next year, which I thought that was a little bit telling considering, like, we don't know what this full roster is shaping up to be, but we saw Oubre play positions 2 through 4 last year and honestly spent a decent portion at power forward. So I thought that was a little telling that he was a two-guard there. Still a lot of work to do, but to answer the question, I do think this is the Sixers team with the highest amount of talent and makes the most sense ever built around Joel Embiid.
Highest amount of talent for the 76ers in quite some time on this roster for our team. Absolutely. And as you look around the East, it's crazy because the East got a little bit better. That's for dang sure. You know, we often had our eyes on the West last year, and really nobody gave any credit to any other team except for the Celtics, and understood. But what the Knicks did, of course, what the Celtics have already added, I still think you're like Giannis is Giannis, and I get it. Milwaukee, they haven't done enough.
I don't think Dame's Dame is my pushback there.
And that's fair. That's proof, or that's somewhat proof. Now, he is one of the greats. And can he get in the gym, get in the lab this offseason, take some of those words to heart and improve? I don't know. Maybe Father Time is catching up to him. But Giannis is a guy that I don't want to dare. I do believe in Giannis, no matter who is out there. He's an absolute beast, and he's already got the job done one time. So I don't think that they're helping him out by no means, and I don't think they've actually done anything. They're actually tied up a lot. But from the standpoint of the East, man, I look at the Bucks, and I'm not trying to sleep on them. And there will be a team or two that are kind of improving, getting better, whether it's Cleveland, whether it's Orlando, whatever it is. But the East will definitely be improved. All right, let's talk a little bit about the NBA as a whole and some of the moves that did catch your attention. If not, there wasn't all that much big moves, but I'm curious. Chris Paul to the Spurs. Love that. We said they needed a point guard down there to help out with Wemby. What type of impact will Chris Paul have besides being that teacher? What type of impact will Chris Paul bring to the floor itself when he gets the opportunity to play next to Wemby next year?
Yeah, I think this is a great move for both sides here. And beyond just like the veteran presence and the leadership and experience and all that type of stuff, Chris Paul is still a very high-level point guard, a table setter for others, and that's the biggest weakness that San Antonio had. That Victor Wembanyama really struggled with getting the ball in good places last year. That there was like worlds where he just didn't get the ball past to him in situations where it should be. Like they ran offense through Jeremy Sochan being the primary ball handler for a lot of situations. He just not is built for that. I think he's going to fit into more of a power forward role when everything's said and done. So he's as good as it gets from a true point guard. I still would like San Antonio to get a more long-term guy that's going to be paired with Wemby. Darius Garland was a guy that I had hoping would end up there a little bit for my eyes, but it doesn't get much better than Chris Paul for creating offense for others. And Wembanyama is going to be a huge beneficiary of that. So I think this is going to be a significant accelerant to his growth for Wembanyama. The Spurs are going to be sneaky good next year. It would not shock me if they find a way to sneak into the playoffs as a lower seed. It does feel like they're turning things around a little quicker than people were expecting.
One move that we didn't discuss that took place on Friday, DeJounte Murray to the Pelicans. What was your read on that?
At the time, quite scared that these options keep falling apart. The Sixers just people picking. I like DeJounte Murray. I think more than the perception of him he gets. I think that is a good move for the Pelicans. They tweeted out some really daunting stats at the time that they were 0-24 in games that they were trailing heading into the fourth quarter, and even worse than that in crunch time. He is a guy who is a bucket getter in the biggest moments. There's a streak this season where he hit 3 game winners in a week for the Hawks. That he's a guy that can get after it and go get it. So I'm happy for DeJounte to get a little bit of a reset button. I do think he hated playing next to Trae Young, and from a basketball perspective, I just don't think it made sense for either one of them there. So happy to see him get down in New Orleans and have an opportunity. I think that could age as one of the better moves of this offseason, as DeJounte's, in my eyes, a buy low candidate who's going to play far better basketball down there than was the case in Atlanta.
All right, let's get on over Oklahoma City, which I believe you said should be or could be favored to win it all next year in the West. I don't really find that all that surprising. They were one of the better teams all season long. We'll see how the odds shake out, but Isaiah Joe staying down there, and they just got Hartenstein from the Knicks, which I thought was a pretty big deal, knowing what he brings to the table. Did they overpay though? Slightly.
Sure, but at the end of the day, like, it comes to, do you want the guy or not? And Hartenstein
Yes.
wasn't in line to get paid for, whether it was OKC or not. I'm pretty happy. Like, I do think Oklahoma City should be the favorites in the West heading into next year. That we saw how ahead of their curve they kind of were next year. That Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is absolutely the real deal and the guy who's going to be a problem in the NBA for a long time. We saw Jalen Williams continue to grow last year. Other guys take steps. Chet Holmgren looking like he was ready for the moment. But the biggest red flag and weakness on that Thunder team was rebounding. They did not have a guy to be capable. I believe it was 29th that they ranked across in the NBA last year. That's just not good enough. And when you add a guy like Isaiah Hartenstein, that begins to bring up some options. If you can move Chet to play some power forward, you can have both of them on the floor together, then you're increasing your odds. And Hartenstein very much has turned himself from a guy that was just like the bare bones of a center. And what I mean by that is like a screener, a roller, a guy who can catch lobs or hit his little floater that he loves, that he added a little bit more to his game. He's a really good playmaker out of the 5-man spot, that he can pass out of the post really well. So I think there's going to be some unique ways that they use him. I think that was a home run addition, even if it was a bit of an overpay. And they also front loaded the contract, which was a really smart thing. So that keeps them open for some flexibility down the line, that he'll be getting a ton of money this year. And then you can, if worse comes to worse, find ways to move him or find ways to add guys around him if that is the case in the next 2 years.
All right, and we'll close up shop on the NBA side, for me at least. Klay Thompson. It seems like LeBron called him at the start of free agency and was like, come play with us here in the Lakers. What is it for Klay in your mind right now? Is it about a championship at this point in time of his career, another championship? Or is it, hey, man, I got to get the bag. He's coming off a max deal. Doesn't want to take too much of a hit. A lot of pride there. He is a guy that will definitely talk back, chirp back. Where are you at with Klay Thompson? What do you see in his future here?
Yeah, from what I've heard for the Klay Thompson situation, there's a lot of this is like he feels a little disrespected in the standpoint of like not being desired. Like Klay has always been a little bit of the little brother in the equation, where we know it was Steph Curry's team, and then there was Kevin Durant there, and even Draymond's a guy who has been more at the forefront in correlation to like the Warriors' success. And I think Klay feels a little bit slighted in that. So I think there's a hunger in him that wants to prove like I'm still that guy. I don't know if I truly feel that, as we know there was the ACL, there was the Achilles, and let's not get it lost that he's coming off an elimination game in which he scored 0 points as well. So there's certainly signs of like Klay Thompson slowing down and not being the guy he once was. He's a far cry from the defender he was, but he's still a guy who can play high-level basketball, who can knock down three-pointers in the right context and the right offense. So I think Klay wants a chance to compete. I'm trending towards believing that he does end up in LA. I don't know if come be my son's backup is the greatest pitch from LeBron James, if that's the angle that he's going with there. But I do think that he's better than he's shown for some stretches with that Golden State Warriors team. I think Dallas could be a really nice spot for him as well if he's getting open 3-point looks from Luka Doncic there. So either one I think is a pretty good spot. But the bottom line is I think Klay's still intent on competing, and he wants to play a real role on a contender.
Would have been nice to have him with the Sixers. That would have been a little shake up there. That would have definitely got me to scream at the outside on the deck. And again, I'm not trying to make Klay out to be something he's not at this point in time of his career. No, but add Klay to this mix.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about one of the greatest shooters of all time. It would be fun. And that's what it comes down to. Again, I started this hit out by saying it's a long stretch. And I know we joke about the in-season tournament, but they got to play it. So if they're playing it, I want to enjoy it. Get rid of those courts. Let's have some fun. Tune in. Of course, the first couple months of the season, we get to Christmas. Normally, NBA owned Christmas. That's not the case anymore. You get to the All-Star break trade deadline, and then you're fingers crossed. You hope Joel Embiid can make it healthy until April, and here we are. And you start that second season up, which is just so crazy. And especially really hit me when the Celtics won it all again this year. It's like it just takes so much for you mentally and, of course, physically and everything else that goes in to win an NBA championship with 4 straight 7-game series. And, oh, by the way, 3 of them opening up against your rivals in your own conference. So Sixers are set up for success. It's an exciting time for this organization. Daryl Morey, nice work, man. You know, if you could say one thing to Daryl Morey at this point in time, Sean Barnard, what are you saying to him?
Yeah, that he trusted his own process here. That for all the skeptics and myself a little bit included here for this cap space plan, that like in reality, Paul George is probably the best player to just leave teams in free agency, probably since like LeBron, when you think about that Miami team and then back to Cleveland and all that type of thing, that we really don't see these players leaving free agency, that it's much more about trades. And even when it is like working together on a trade, such as the James Harden situation here in Philadelphia, it's been much more revolved around that. So Daryl Morey wanted to put the Sixers in a unique spot where they could offer this level of money to players that are deserving of that level of money. And he managed to get the job done with Paul George. So that takes a lot of trust. That takes a lot of maneuvering the salary cap and allowing all this money to get off the books. And ultimately, it's a slam dunk. So shout out to Daryl Morey, who you may not agree with the game that he plays or be a fan of the game that he plays, but he does it at a higher level than any general manager out there. So it ultimately worked out in his favor right here.
Yeah, look, he's not a guy in my mind that, you know, I always thought of Daryl Morey in a different light until he came here. And then when he comes here, he is a very simple.
Yeah.
I don't want to make it sound too simple though. On the flip side of that, but it's not like he's reinventing the wheel. He wants the best players out there. The timing of it is a little bit more intuitive than maybe I'm giving him credit, where it's like, you know, and oh, by the way, dealing with these egos, these personalities, that can't be easy. But to get to this point where we're at right now, and there was one big guy, one big name, and it was all about the Clippers. Once the Clippers said, no, we're good, Sixers were like, come on down, man. And here we are. And snapping of fingers. Like, we knew Maxey wasn't going anywhere. You're not going to do anything with Joel Embiid. For the people, the idiots that call into those radio stations saying you need to trade him, you're not going to trade Joel Embiid. You know, filling out a roster, they would have had money to spend if they didn't give it to Paul George. So there would have been some decent names, but nothing worthwhile to get caught up in. This is obviously on the opposite end of the stratosphere, not even the spectrum, so much so that DraftKings has the Sixers second in the whole league to win it all. Yeah, it's crazy. But I understand it too, just for the people out there. I know that there's a lot of crazy numbers that are floating out there. I saw 12-1. I know books are saying 16-1, maybe when they dropped. Sixers bounced up. We had conversations about the Sixers 2 weeks ago where I said I just did not feel like they needed to be at the number that they were at. Again, too many unanswered questions at that point in time, but here we are now, and they are plus 850 or plus 800. Just dropped. No. Excuse me. 8-1 on DraftKings to win the NBA championship in 2024-25. And the Celtics are the only team in front of them at plus 295. Directly behind them, you got the OKC Thunder and the Nuggets at plus 850. Knicks plus 950. We'll close up shop with the T-Wolves at 10-1. A lot of fun times in the NBA, Sean Barnard. I love it. Great stuff this weekend. Great stuff, of course, to continue to come across our timeline with some of these names. Who's the best available out there? Anything worthwhile? Not from the Sixers perspective, but maybe a difference maker for a team that would smack a fan base in the face, you know?
Yeah, I would say Clay is probably still the biggest name out there, the name to pay the most attention to. It would not shock me if we see at least one semi-notable trade still this offseason. Like, I still think Ingram, and there's a lot of buzz with the Kings. Even Zach LaVine's been in the mix with the Bulls, although that's a really unappealing contract. So I think there will be a framework of some sort of 3-team deal between the Bulls, the Kings, and the Pelicans that solves a lot of each of their problems there. So that's probably going to be from the NBA-wide landscape, the most notable change that I think is still yet to happen.
Yeah, and I didn't even mention the Mavericks. I know you did slightly by bringing up Clay, but it's crazy. The team went to the finals, and you know nobody is really giving them the respect. Maybe hand of the year a little bit over here as well, but didn't even look at them, didn't even discuss them, didn't bring it up. And I know that they brought Marshall, 3-year, $27 million deal there. Again, in the running for in the running for Clay. So we'll see how that one is going to work out. All right, Paul George, 4 years, $212 million deal. What's next? What do you think? When's this announcement? Is it this week? Is there parameters? Is there a calendar that they can't discuss? Are we doing anything on the up and up right now? What's next? When are we getting a Paul George in a Sixers uniform?
I think sooner than we expect. That I think this is going to be all like July 1st was the real date that we had to wait for, which is obviously today. So there was a lot of this going down in the midnight hours of last night, 3:30 a.m. is I believe what the Woj tweet officially dropped. Did my best to hang up for, but ended up throwing in the towel around 2 a.m. last night when it wasn't happening there. But I think that there's going to be as quickly as they can get this done. I think this is mutual feeling where Paul George, even little things like wearing the Allen Iverson shirt to that meeting with the Sixers brass there, like that's a cool move. I think he's excited about it. I did not expect him to want to leave Los Angeles, as we know he's from there and all that. So I think this is all going to be going down this week, the introduction and all those types of things, and still some moves to be made. So for now, Daryl Morey's still going to be in the lab, seeing if he can cook up a Reggie Bullock edition or whoever else he believes could help this team. So a lot still to go down.
Be curious if that's going to take place on the 3rd or the 5th. I don't think they'll do anything on the 4th, obviously. So maybe the 3rd, and if not, then maybe we're looking at possibly next week. But we'll see. We'll see how this one plays out. Again, I don't think there's any second guessing. The Woj bomb has been dropped. The Sixers and Paul George 4-year deal. Unbelievable. All right, quickly on the other things that took place over the weekend, Sean Barnard, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and talk about the Phillies. 2 out of 4 against the Marlins. Ho-hum. But it was about the way that they won the 2 games. You know, they dominated and then they came back. And, you know, that's one thing that we've noticed about this team. They just don't give up. They got a lot of fight in them. And I get it. They're dealing with a lot of injuries right now. Everybody's going to need in your best. I'm telling everybody right now, for the health of your livelihood, of your family over the next couple weeks, you got to take a deep breath. Too many injuries. This team is not going to compete with some of the times that you think that they should go and sweep a team. It's the middle of the summer, so you're kind of inching. You're probably definitely in that moment from a player's perspective of like, man, this season, it's been a long one. It's been a grind. But yes, they're dealing with a lot of injuries right now. They lost 2 of 4 to the Marlins, got the day off, and then heading to Chicago and got the Braves. So a couple big games here, but 2 out of 4 against the Marlins, fun victories there.
Yeah, absolutely. And doing it kind of in the grinder way a little bit. Like even the comeback win yesterday, which I think was the most important win in the context of all these. The single through the gap to score 2 to take the lead by Trey Turner. Some small ball action that we're starting to see. Stuff like Rafael Marchand laying down the bunt to advance runners and doing things the little way. I think Marchand, that's a real thing to pay attention to. Garrett Stubbs should be looking over his shoulder a little nervous right now because he's been phenomenal since he came up. So there is a little competition that is popping up around the edges here. Obviously, JT Realmuto has everything held down when he's in check. But for next year, if I was Garrett Stubbs, I'd be a little nervous right now of the production at center beyond just him, or at catcher beyond him right there. So this Phillies team, they're competing, they're grinding. I kind of like that they're going to have a little bit of these challenges here. And then obviously when they return to full health, that's when they'll look like the Phillies that we do know. But I think it's important for them to go through a little bit of this tough time, as for the most part, it's been a little bit of a breeze so far this year, but it's been fun to watch them battle.
Copa America going off again this evening with a disaster of result for Team USA last week. Timothy Weah getting a red card and just never been able to get out in front of that. They ended up losing that game to Panama, which was just incredible. But here we are, and they got to win tonight, and it's not going to be easy against Uruguay. DraftKings plus 160 on the 3-way action. Uruguay plus 190, the draw plus 220. Odds are telling you it's going to be a good game. Obviously, Team USA needs this a hell of a lot more than anybody else, including Uruguay. So maybe the urgency is there from the United States, but man, I'm not holding my breath. And it's going to be a disaster if this team does not get out of the group stage tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not something I have a ton of optimism about either. No. This isn't anything I'm saying go rush and pull your money on Team USA, because it hasn't looked particularly pretty. And that seat feels like it's getting quite warm over there in head coaching with Greg forget how to say the name. Bullhalter there. So yeah. But not a ton to be hyped about from a USA soccer perspective right now. It's been kind of disappointing because this is the time where I would like to try and, get into it. And I just haven't felt it with this team whatsoever.
And this was the tournament, as Joe Tanzi joined us last week and said that there's really, because there's no World Cup qualifiers because we're hosting, you'll have the Gold Cup, but it's always Mexico versus Team USA. Like, this was the moment to pull out the temperature and get that check, pull out the gauge and see how you measure up. But not good right now. We'll see what happens tonight. The Euros have been awesome. We're in the knockout stage. We almost had an unbelievable upset by England losing, and then they were able to come back, which was just crazy. They ended up scoring a goal basically in the last minute of regulation, extra time it was. They sent it to extra periods, and the next thing you know, added time. Excuse me, they scored an added time. Then they sent it to extra time. Got to get my soccer phrasing right. And then they ended up pulling away there. Nice win there. We do have 2 games going off today, including France, who I believe was your favorite to win it all, taking on Belgium. That game was ugly. You got Portugal and Slovenia coming up a little bit later. Of course, this is the summer of soccer. Also, Wimbledon going down. That starts today, I believe. Started this morning. I'll be watching that a little bit. Maybe get Johnny Jansen on to give us a Wimbledon breakdown. And then finally, as I said, no Phillies taking on the Cubs starting tomorrow. But we do have 3 games going off today. First one, the Astros and Jays, 3:07. Mets and Nats at 6:45. And then the Brewers and Rockies coming up at 8:40 p.m. So a lot going on in the sports world. We try to cover it all for you right here on the Daily Ticket. Sean Barnard, any final thoughts before we get out of here, sir?
Yeah, still a lot of madness in the NBA world that I think is going to go down. So make sure to stay tuned for that. But overall, this should be a day of celebration. That the Paul George news did happen. That is a big deal for this Sixers team. So shout out to Daryl Morey for that. And let's see how the rest of the roster comes together.
And I know you're not slighting him, but and Tyrese Maxey got a deal.
Yeah.
Like this very well. It's tough to sit there and say it with this day and age, but Maxey could be that guy that starts and finishes his career with the Sixers. He really
Absolutely.
could be. He could be that dominant of a player there. You're like, all right, we're not losing him. Just look at his so far into the career and what he's already showed us. So I love it, and I'm so happy that that he's staying here. And I know that was never up for anybody else to make that decision. We always knew he was going to be back, but I'm loving the fact that he took all those options out. It's gung ho.
Yeah.
We're here. As Joel Embiid says, he's the franchise. So let's see what he's got here. Great stuff. Sean Barnard will keep it moving. Other side, if you missed anything, running it back. That's Sean Barnard. I'm Sean Brace. If you missed anything after that, get on over to foxphogambler.com where all of our podcasts are available.